Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you also to everyone else who's here today to hear us talk about some of the national parks. We're really excited for Movie Club. For the next 6 weeks, we're gonna be highlighting different national parks. So we're really thankful for you, Sasha, for being here, representing Joshua Tree National Park. I know a ton of us are from California, so and the LA area, so Joshua Tree is near and dear to all of our hearts.
Yeah,
And with
happy to be
that,
here.
yeah, awesome. With that, let's get started. So this is a movie club discussion for those of you who haven't been here before. We're at Global Inheritance, we're recommending different just cause-based films. Each week we kind of have a different theme that we're highlighting, and we'll just send over some of our favorite documentaries or feature films that highlight different topics. They can be social, environmental, but that's kind of what we're doing this summer. For the next 2 weeks, we're highlighting different Ken Burns documentaries on the National Parks series. It's called The National Parks, America's Best Idea. So with that, I guess our first question for Sasha is going to be, do you think national parks are America's best idea?
That is a great question. So, I think America has had a lot of good ideas, but the national park system is definitely one of them. For almost 150 years, they have been places where people can go to enjoy nature and learn about history. And one of the cool things I think that is new to some people is that the NPS, the National Park Service, manages a lot of different types of property. So there are historic properties like Lincoln Boyhood Home in Indiana, which preserves the childhood home of Abraham Lincoln, and the Statue of Liberty in New York, which everybody knows. And there are national scenic riverways like St. Croix in the Midwest, and national parkways like Natchez Trace in the Southeast. And there are, of course, the big national parks full of wilderness and trails and scenery like Rocky Mountain National Park and Yosemite, and of course Joshua Tree. So the National Park mission is to preserve and protect natural and cultural resources unimpaired so that we and future generations can enjoy and be inspired by them. So it's a really neat idea in that these places are protected so that they can remain as much the same as possible and that people can enjoy them and be inspired by them.
Yeah, what's your favorite thing to do?
I think that the things I most often do in the park are hiking and climbing, but I think my favorite thing to do in the park is stargazing, because even though I live in a rural community and it's pretty dark and the stargazing is pretty good here, it's even better in the park because there is a lack of light pollution. So Joshua Tree is a great place to do that.
Is Joshua Tree, I know there's a couple like dark sky places. Is it one of those? Yep. That's awesome.
It is, yes. I'm not super familiar with how you maintain international dark sky accreditation, but I know that we are an international dark sky park, and it's a really neat part of our park because it's so big, and on some sides it's surrounded by rural communities. We do get some light pollution from the Coachella Valley, like Palm Springs and Indio and all that, but the northern part of the park is like much less inhabited, so it is really dark. And we do a lot of I know dark sky kind of preservation things, so like making sure that our lights have like fixtures that like make sure the light aimed the right way, so it's not like polluting, and we use as little light as possible where we can. So it's really neat and important, especially for the wildlife.
Definitely. Okay. That is awesome. Okay, so we can move on to some of our next questions. We're going to go back to the documentary. So the documentary, it follows the story of how Yosemite was turned into a national park. Could you tell us a bit about the history of Joshua National Park, when and how it was made into a national park?
Yeah, so I really love the origin story of Joshua Tree National Park because it shows how much of a difference one person can make when they really fight for something that they care about. So our park exists because of a woman named Minerva Hamilton Hoyt. She was originally from the South and grew up on a cotton plantation in, I think, Mississippi. And she came west as an adult and moved to Pasadena And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a city in the Los Angeles area. And when she was in Pasadena, she developed a strong relationship with the nearby Mojave Desert, where I am right now. And she visited often, especially after the death of her husband and her son. So she turned to the desert for healing, and at one point described herself as possessed by the area, which I really love and relate to. And she often visited on horseback and slept in the open air in her sleeping bag. So she had these like really magical experiences in this area. She liked the sound, or as she described, the eerie sound of the wind going through the Joshua trees, which is really cool. And she liked the scent of all the plants, like the juniper and the creosote. And over time, she noticed that there were a lot of people like with landscaping companies who were coming to the area from distant neighboring urban areas, you know, like Los Angeles and San Diego, just to name two big cities nearby. And they were coming here to dig up plants and take them back to those cities to plant in people's yards. So Minerva started a petition asking the government to protect the land that is now known as Joshua Tree National Park, which extends from, I think her original proposal was bigger than the size of the park now, and definitely bigger than what it became after her proposal, but she basically wanted to extend from Highway 10 all the way to Highway 62. So it was a really huge area. And one of the ways that she did this, which I think is really neat, is she created a traveling desert plants exhibit. So it was like a walk-in room that would have all of these native desert plants that were like alive and arranged in ways that they might be arranged in nature, but like really condensed. So they were a little more inspiring because the desert is pretty spread out here. But so she could actually bring the desert to folks in other parts of the United States, namely the East Coast, which has a lot of money in politics. So in, I would say her like big hurrah was in 1928. The International Flower Show was where she really went all in, and she employed taxidermists to taxidermy native animals. I don't know how she procured them. I'm assuming that it was like roadkill. I hope that it was roadkill. But so she had taxidermists and landscape painters and collectors that created this realistic and captivating image of the desert that she could share with people who had never visited. She had planes flying in with fresh plants every day while the show was running. And eventually all of her efforts culminated in a little over 800,000 acres being set aside as Joshua Tree National Monument in 1936 by President Roosevelt. And we became a national park in 1994. So because of Minerva and how much she loved the desert, that is why our park exists, which is really cool. And of course she had support, and she did have the finances to, you know, finance all of those crazy things that she did, but she was really like the champion of the desert, or the apostle of the cacti, as people call her too.
Wow, that is such a great story. I've never heard that before. So thank you so much.
It's pretty epic. And I feel like she's kind of an unsung hero. Like at our park, we celebrate her a lot, and we have like a mural on our visitor center. Actually, two of our visitors, I think all three of our visitor centers have like information about Minerva and her efforts. But I think outside of the park, you know, she's a super well-known person, but she was awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah, I think everyone's heard of John Muir, I'm sure, but Minerva, she's new, and that's great to hear her story.
Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the central ideas of the documentary is about protecting the United States' greatest wonders. What are the greatest wonders at Joshua Tree National Park? In terms of flora or fauna or any locations?
Okay, well, so I think it's really dependent on the visitor. So like if you're a climber, the greatest wonder is the rocks. If you really like stars, the greatest wonder might be the way that you can see the Milky Way in the summer. But there are a lot of things going on at Joshua Tree. So every visitor is going to find their own greatest wonder, which I think is really neat and special. Like some of my coworkers like to say that our park is a geology park because of all the rocks. I personally like to think of it as an ecology park because I really like the way the plants and animals interact. and the way that plants interact with each other and how plants interact with their environment, because that's what I'm really interested in. But so everyone will find something different to connect to, which is what's really special about all national parks.
Mm-hmm.
So the Joshua tree itself is a really special plant. They only grow in the Mojave Desert, and they like it here because it's a hot, cold desert. So it's over 100 degrees in summer, like today, but we get freezing temperatures and some snow in the winter. So they really need an environment or a natural environment outdoors where there's like a hot, cold change. And we get about 4.5 inches of precipitation annually. So they really like dryness. They don't like too much rain. And they're really well adapted to this climate. My favorite thing about the Joshua tree, though, is their relationship with their only pollinator, the yucca moth. So they are only pollinated by a single species, the yucca moth, and they're these really tiny, inconspicuous little like whitish brownish moths that are about the size of like your pinky fingernail. And they come out when Joshua trees are in bloom. And so Joshua trees don't, as far as I have read and understood, they don't have like a regular bloom cycle since I've been here, which has only been like 3.5 years. It seems like they have a big bloom about every other year. But there is research that's happening to kind of better understand this relationship between the yucca moth emerging to pollinate and the Joshua tree. Like, do they emerge in the spring no matter what the bloom is like, or is there, you know, like some scent or other ecological indicator that lets them know it's time to pollinate? So they emerge from the ground as adults, and they have a pretty short life. I think they live for maybe like a week, as lots of insects do. They have short lifespans. And they come out, and their sole purpose is to mate with each other and to pollinate Joshua trees. So they find a Joshua tree that has blooms, and they like have these proboscis, which are essentially like tentacles, and lots of insects have them, like butterflies have them. And they'll use these like proboscis tentacles to like pull the pollen from the Joshua tree and like pack it into a nice tight ball. And then because they don't eat as adults, they don't have mouths, they have modified mouth parts. So they have these like little jaws kind of, I would call them, because they're like modified mouth parts. And they put the pollen ball into those jaws and they carry them to a neighboring Joshua tree. And then they very carefully with their tentacle proboscis unpack the pollen deep into the flower of that neighboring, or I shouldn't even say neighboring, but into that unpollinated Joshua tree. And they engage in what's called intentional pollination. So they like know what they're doing, or maybe they don't know what they're doing, but they know they need to do it. Whereas an animal, you know, like a hummingbird, they accidentally, or I shouldn't say accidentally, but they incidentally pollinate because they're like trying to get the nectar and trying to get food. And then they like get all the pollen all over, and then they get all the pollen over the next flower. Yucca moths do it on purpose. Mm-hmm. And that is because after they pollinate a Joshua tree, all of the yucca moths that are pollinating are female, and they lay their eggs in the ovary of the flower, because once that flower has become pollinated, it will produce a fruit. And their eggs hatch, and larvae eat their way through the Joshua tree seeds, which are stacked in like columns in the fruit. And then they eat their way through the seeds until they get to the ones that taste kind of yucky and aren't super nutritious. And then they pop out of or I shouldn't say they pop out, they burrow out of the fruit. And then they drop to the ground, and they dig in and they hibernate until they emerge as adults. And it's just this like really beautiful cycle where if it weren't for Joshua trees, yucca moths wouldn't survive because their larvae wouldn't have anything to eat. And if it weren't for yucca moths, Joshua trees wouldn't survive because they can reproduce asexually through cloning, but they wouldn't have genetic diversity, which is super important in changing climates. So I really like that story of the Joshua tree and the yucca moth, and that's my favorite thing about our plant, our namesake plant.
That is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
That's really cool. So it's an ecology park. It's not a geology park.
Yeah, I feel like when people probably don't always think of a ton of life happening in the desert, but definitely a misconception. There's a ton going on. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's another thing that I really like about our park is when I do programs with children, I usually ask them what they think of when they hear the word desert. And it's like dry, sand, barren, wasteland, no water, like things like cactus, things like that. And all of the plants and animals here are adapted to a really specific habitat. They can have severe weather changes, like really cold or really hot. And the plants and animals are really special here. Yeah. So, and there is a lot of diversity here, which I think would surprise a lot of folks.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for listening.
Of course. So our next question is a little bit more general, and I'm sure you're not going to be able to speak for all of the national parks, but at least probably for Joshua Tree. So are national parks still updating services, like creating new trails or adding or subtracting lands, or is everything pretty permanent the way it is?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, the main purpose of national parks is to preserve places unimpaired, so unchanged. But I think now that national parks have become so much popular in the last 5 to 10 years, there are definitely ways that the park and other national park sites are considering managing for these new crowds, which you have to. So Joshua Tree, for example, had I think it was 1.3 million visitors annually only 7 years ago in 2013. And now we see about 3 million visitors annually. So we have doubled our visitation, over doubled our visitation in the last 7 years. Which is a really fast expansion, especially, you know, the government moves slowly. So it's like, you know, hard to fund new projects that we need. And it's like, there's some adaptations that need to happen. So I know in some parks, more campgrounds are going on the reservation system so that people can better plan their visit. And parks like Zion have implemented shuttle systems to better manage parking and traffic. Joshua Tree actually had a pilot shuttle system for a couple of years that hopefully we will bring back. We still have to process the data and figure out how to do it or how to implement a shuttle system efficiently. But yeah, and some parking areas might be expanded, but I mean, popular parks are definitely having to change their management plans to accommodate new crowds. But that's part of how we protect the park, to make sure that the natural and cultural resources are preserved by being prepared to effectively manage our visitation.
Absolutely. So this next question is definitely a great segue from that point. And so the episode shows tourists visiting the park in the 1890s to take photos of them, like looking over, hanging over rock formations at Glacier Point in Yosemite National Park. And just kind of thinking of that, we're interested to hear how social media and other things have played a part in making these national parks way more visible among everyone, and way more interesting to go visit, because once you're able to see a photo, and once you're able to see a photo of everyday people just going to visit these places, they seem a lot more accessible.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I mean, probably social media has changed national park visitation, but that's just my guess. I don't have any actual data on that. I don't know if the park does. But I mean, social media has changed our lives in so many ways. You know, we have live access, like right now, you know, we have live access to what's happening in our friends and family's lives. And it's really easy to get inspired by the cool places, like you said, that people are visiting, and by the cool things that people are doing. And I actually had a conversation about this with my family a few months ago. My mom was talking about how she didn't travel as much as I do when she was young, and she didn't visit national parks and didn't go on road trips. She didn't go camping very much, except for when she was like a child. And thought that maybe it had to do with the fact that information in general is so easy to access nowadays. You know, if I want to go to the North Rim of the Grand Canyon, I literally just plug it into my, or I could just plug it into my phone, and it tells me exactly how to get there and about what time I will get there. And we didn't have access to that kind of technology 30 years ago. You know, you had to use a map, you had to like plan where you were going to stop. You can just Google, you know, where can I sleep for tonight, campings, you know, campgrounds or hotels and stuff like that. So I think the downfall to this is that sometimes we think that the information we immediately get is all the information we need. So maybe if I'm going to the North Rim of the Grand Canyon, I don't even map the North Rim of the Grand Canyon specifically. And, you know, my map app takes me to the more popular South Rim. And then it's like another few hours before I can get to the other side, or my plan has to totally change because I'm on a road trip and, you know, I planned it in. Or now I don't know that the visitor center closed at 5 and I'm arriving at 7, or I don't know that the campgrounds are full on weekends, so I'm arriving after the visitor center closes and I don't have a backup plan for camping. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that we have a solid plan and we don't just rely on the 5 seconds that we spend with our phone to give us all the information that we need.
Yeah.
It's great to visit the park website and to call a visitor center and ask questions in the days or weeks before you come, so you know exactly what you're getting into and how you're going to do it. So I wouldn't say that Instagram or social media is a problem. People like making memories and sharing with their friends, and people are going to recreate differently in the park and have different experiences. And some people want to come here and, you know, just drive through and take beautiful pictures, and, you know, that's totally fine. We just have to make sure that we know what's allowed and what's not. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. And then is it just the national parks website that you're mentioning? So if we just
Well, so specifically all national parks, the website will start with www.nps.gov and then backslash to the 4-letter acronym for that park. So our park is nps.gov/JOTR. But if you just like do a quick search for, you know, Yellowstone National Park or Yosemite National Park, just make sure you're going to the .gov website, because that's our official website. I do get a lot of folks in the visitor centers who will come and, you know, be like, hey, I heard about this rock and I want to go see it, or I heard about this trail, and I'll ask them where they got the info, and it's sometimes from like a blog or something. And while those can be like great ways for you to get inspired about your trip, but they're not like always reliable. So just make sure you're visiting the .gov website or calling the visitor center.
Yeah. Okay. That is great. Great information. So then this kind of goes back to some things that you already have brought up, but what is being done at Joshua Tree to make sure that it's continued to be protected and not overwhelmed by tourism?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. So Joshua Tree is interesting because we are so close to so many major cities. You know, we have Palm Springs an hour south of us. We have LA and San Diego 2 hours away, Las Vegas 3 hours away. So we get a lot of international visitors who fly into the major airports, and we get a lot of weekend visitors or visitors who are camping from the closer communities. But, you know, public lands exist for 2 main reasons: so that they can be protected and so people can enjoy them. So public lands belong to all of us. So, you know, it's everybody's right to have access to public lands and to be able to enjoy them. But it's a little bit different because there are rules that help protect the park and to protect the visitor. So it's important for folks to make sure that they consume that information before their visit, we talked about earlier. So, you know, and we also talked a little bit about this earlier, how management has to be adaptive. So we're getting so many more visitors now than we did 10 years ago. We will, you know, parks will change some things in order to effectively manage the new crowds. So we're just, I would say, in order to make sure the parks isn't overwhelmed, we're just trying to share information with our audience and the visiting public to make sure they have access to rules and regulations before they visit.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our visitor centers, which hopefully people are going to before they enter the park. We're kind of unique in that 2 out of 3 of our, well, we have 4 visitor centers. One is kind of seasonal though, but our main visitor centers are actually outside of the park. So you can go and access information before you enter the park. And then we have our communications team, which, works on press releases and our social media, and connecting with like local and non-local news organizations. And then we have interpretive rangers like me who share information at the visitor centers and in the park with people and do cool things like this, where we can share information with like a wider crowd of people. But yeah, we're just trying to make sure people have access to the information, because informed visitors are safe and respectful visitors that are great to the park.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the episode talks about how wilderness is a necessity for humans. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is it wilderness or wildness?
Wildness, sorry, wildness. Yes. You're right.
I have done a little bit of thinking on this, and I think that wildness is subjective, and when you apply this quote to national parks, the obvious connection, like you said, might be wilderness. Mm-hmm. So there's some visitors who might not be comfortable with a true wilderness experience. Maybe they haven't historically had access to the outdoors. Maybe they have fears of the outdoors. And some people will feel more comfortable and curious in wild spaces, like in the wilderness. But I think just getting out of your comfort zone and like getting into what feels like a wild space for you is awesome. And national parks are great places for that. So whether it's driving an hour through Joshua Tree and using the pit toilets, or doing a 40-mile backpacking trip across the park in the winter, national parks are really great places to have unique experiences that feel wild to you. And I think that quote just really speaks to human nature and wanting to experience things that are different and new and exciting. And there are lots of opportunities for people to experience that in national parks, whether it's just existing there and just coming for a short visit, or doing a longer, more exciting experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm sure that not everyone is able to go out to a national park right now, or get out into maybe true wilderness. But what can be done right now to like educate people about the park, everything that lives inside it, and still keep people excited about these like natural wonders that we have, even if you're not able to go there physically?
Yeah, this is definitely something we think about at our park, making sure that Joshua Tree is accessible for people who can't visit. And I think it's been on the forefront of everyone's minds, especially during the pandemic, when we were all sheltering in place and staying home and staying safe. So one of the things that we did recently is our interpretive brand, or I should say our interpretive division, created these ranger moments that are like really short videos where folks who live in the park or like near the park are just kind of exploring things that you would also experience in the park, in their backyard, and sharing that information with people so that they can learn and get excited. And then something we do longer term is our education branch is the part of the park that works with school groups. So they do a lot of outreach into our local communities, and they will actually, I used to work with the education branch, and it was really awesome and fun. And those staff will go into local communities and schools and kind of bring these experiences to students. So there is an activity we do where we make these like rock cakes that are, like sand and rubble, like baked in an oven with like bigger pebbles inside. And then we bring these like water droppers for students to use and kind of like experience erosion. And then we try to couple that with a field trip to the park. So these kids that are able to experience and learn about and be exposed to, the science of Joshua Tree in a classroom, then they can apply those things that they learn during their field trip. And I think that's really important because just to expose like young people to the outdoors, like I grew up actually in Los Angeles, and I was lucky to live in a community where I could like access the beach pretty easily. But my family wasn't like super adventurous. We didn't travel a lot. So I didn't experience a lot of like variety in my outdoor experiences. It was mostly just literally going to the beach and that was it. I didn't go camping. I didn't go hiking. I never went to a national park until my adulthood. So I think it's cool to like bring these experiences to young people and make them feel more comfortable with the sciences and with the outdoors. But I would say for your average adult visitor, if they can't visit the park now, or it's hard for them to visit the park in the future, there are a lot of, if they have access to the internet, there are a lot of experiences online. So through our Instagram or our Facebook and our website, nps.gov/JOTR. Actually, I don't know if it's backslash or forward slash. I don't know the difference between those two, but it's a slash and you can try
50-50.
Yeah. But we have some like virtual tours of like our Keys Ranch property, which is a historic ranch that was donated to the park. It's within the park, but it was donated by a family who lived in the area for several decades. So you kind of can access these experiences virtually. And I would also say for people who like to read, there are a lot of books about the area that are really cool. There's a book specific to Keys Ranch. There's a book called Growing Up at the Desert Queen Ranch, I believe it's called. And it's about the experience of Willis Keys, who wrote the book. He's the son of Bill Keys, who was a miner and rancher here in the area. And so you can learn about the history of the park that way. There are some books that are written about the Native American tribes who have lived historically in this area for hundreds of years. There are plant books that can teach you about the plants and the animals that live here. So the information is definitely accessible for those who are interested in many different mediums.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing all those.
Yeah, I'd like to get people informed.
Nice. So our next question is, does Joshua Tree have a sister park in another country?
Yes, we actually do. It is in Nacional Galapagos in the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. I believe we started forming this partnership about 3 years ago, so it's pretty new. One of the things that we have in common is that we both protect tortoises that are on the endangered species list, which is pretty neat. Theirs are way bigger than ours. They're like huge, and our desert tortoises are like pretty modest. But yeah, so I don't know too much about that partnership or what it really means for our parks, but it is really nice to connect with other national parks in other countries and figure out how they manage their plants and animals, how they manage their visitation. So yeah.
Absolutely. Great. And then we have one more question for you, but before we ask that, I'm just going to give everyone here a chance to think about if they have any questions for you. And if you do have any questions, please go ahead and submit them in the Q&A section. And then if you want to come on video, you'll be welcome to come on video too to ask the question. So just take a minute to think about anything that you might have to ask. And then our last structured question for you so far is, what's your favorite park outside of Joshua Tree?
So I really like San Juan Island National Historic Park in Washington. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't.
So it's another one of like the smaller NPS sites, but I used to work there with a nonprofit partner, and it is a really beautiful place. It's on an island, so the weather is amazing, surrounded by water. It's a great place to go canoeing and see like deer. It's really beautiful.
Wow.
But it preserved the national park site itself preserves the history of the Pig War, which wasn't actually a war, but it was like a potential war. And it was a really tense time between Britain and America. And it started because of a pig that got shot. So it's a really neat story about how things can be resolved without violence, and encourage everybody to go research the pig war, because it is a really neat story about how two countries were really mad at each other and then they ended up resolving their differences.
Wow. I will absolutely be researching that after. Very cool.
It's a really cool story, and also the park is really beautiful. So if you are ever on San Juan Island off the coast of Washington, I would definitely encourage visiting. They have two sites actually. So they have American Camp and British Camp, which are the sites of the two camps of the respective armies. And it's really cool seeing the difference in the climate. So like American Camp was like really hot and dry, and it was almost like prairie-like. And then British Camp is like really beautiful and lush and, you know, like green, and like the structures are really nice. So it's just really cool, like being able to see the difference on like an island, how drastically different just those two areas are, and seeing how the different hosts lived.
So where is that most easily accessible from? Is it from Seattle or somewhere else?
So when I would travel from the mainland, I would usually go out of Anacortes. So Anacortes, Washington is a town on the coast, and it's like, they have like a big port. So Anacortes, Washington is how to access San Juan Island.
Very, very cool. That's awesome.
It's a beautiful place.
Nice. Okay, one last call for questions from anyone and everyone in our audience.
So much.
And then even in the meantime, if there's just anything else that we haven't already touched on that you'd just love people to know about Joshua Tree, the national parks in general, to just close off on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of discussion nowadays about how like national parks are just becoming so popular and like highly visited. And I think that every visitor has a place in the park. It's just making sure that folks are educating themselves before they go to these outdoor spaces, so they know the rules and regulations and they're able to recreate responsibly and safely. But yeah, I encourage everybody to like look up their local public lands, because some of them are surprising. Like Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area is in Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles and I did not know that I had a national park site, you know, literally a few miles away from where I lived. So just, I would encourage people to look for the small public lands, not just the big public lands, because those are really special too.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah, everyone should come visit Joshua Tree because it's the best.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like these days we're so used to getting information like on site, on demand, on our phones. But yeah, I think it is so important. Just take a few minutes to research it, and it also does become that much more rewarding too when you know the history behind, or know where you want to go check out. So I think that's such great information to share with us. Thank you. Yeah,
I agree with that. You know, it makes the experience much more valuable when you like have some background information.
Totally. Cool. Great. Well, I think that's everything for today. If you guys don't have any questions, if you guys have any remaining questions as we move forward, don't hesitate to email us, and we'll be in contact with you all. But thank you so much, Sasha, for today and talking with us, and really starting off the National Park Series. We're really excited to continue on with it. So everyone, keep in touch, and thanks for joining the movie club discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this and sharing information about national parks. And thank you everybody for watching. Yeah, and for joining us.